Welcome back to our channel, Shattered Trust Stories, where we explore the untold stories of relationships, heartbreaks, and the unexpected twists of life. Let's get started. It was supposed to be a special day. It was supposed to be one of those moments that I would cherish forever. Her birthday. The one day of the year that I could shower her with love and attention, to show her how much she meant to me. For the past month, I'd been planning every detail, making sure it was perfect. I'd spent hours picking out a thoughtful gift, writing her a card that expressed all the things I had never managed to say to her in our busy, everyday life. I was excited. I wanted to make her feel like the queen she was, but as the day arrived, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a ticking time bomb that I woke up early that morning, still giddy with excitement. I set up the living room with candles, balloons, and a small birthday cake. The kids were still asleep, and I took advantage of the quiet to sneak into the kitchen and make her favorite breakfast. I could already imagine the smile on her face when she walked in, the surprise, the joy. It was going to be perfect. When she came downstairs, she looked tired, her eyes a little puffy, like she hadn't slept well the night before. I didn't think too much of it at first. I figured she had been busy with work or maybe just needed more rest. "Happy birthday, my love," I said, walking over to kiss her on the cheek. She gave me a half smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks," she said, her voice sounding distant. She looked over at the breakfast table but didn't seem as excited as I thought she would be. "Is everything okay?" I asked, suddenly feeling a small knot form in my stomach. "Oh, yeah. Just tired," she replied, not making much eye contact. That I could feel the distance, the coldness, like an invisible wall between us. I told myself that it was just a rough morning, and she'd warm up once the day unfolded. But something about her response didn't sit right with me. She was usually so enthusiastic on her birthday. She would normally gush over the thoughtful details I had arranged. But today, she seemed indifferent. We ate breakfast in silence, the air thick with unspoken tension. I asked her what she wanted to do for the rest of the day, thinking we could go out to a nice restaurant, take a walk in the park, maybe even head to the spa if she was up for it. But instead of responding with excitement, she simply shrugged. "I'm not really in the mood to do anything today," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I think I'm just going to relax. I was actually planning to go to dinner with some coworkers tonight." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Dinner with coworkers? I thought we had plans. It was her birthday, and we were supposed to spend it together. This was supposed to be our time. "Wait, what?" I asked, a frown forming on my face. "But we talked about this. I've been planning everything for today. We were going to spend it together." "I know," she replied, almost curtly. "But they've been asking me to join them for dinner for a while now, and I don't want to let them down. It's just dinner, and it'll only be a couple of hours." I was speechless. I tried to process what she was saying, but it didn't make sense. Why would she choose dinner with her coworkers over spending time with me on her birthday? It was something so small, yet it felt like the beginning of something much bigger. The first crack in our relationship, one that I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though the confusion and hurt were palpable. "I thought we had made plans for today. I thought this day was for us." "I'm sorry, but I really can't cancel," she said, now avoiding my gaze. "It's important for work. We've been talking about this for a while." Her words felt like they were coming from someone else. The woman I married would have never chosen work or coworkers over spending her birthday with me. She would have understood how much effort I'd put into making this day special. But now, in that moment, she seemed so distant, so uninterested that I tried to brush it off, to rationalize it. Maybe she just needed a break. Maybe she had work stress and needed to unwind with people she felt comfortable with. But deep down, a cold, uncomfortable feeling began to rise in my chest. I tried not to let it show. I didn't want to ruin her day, but I couldn't ignore how hurt I felt. "You'll be back soon, right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping for some reassurance. "I'll be back late," she said, glancing at her watch. "I'll see you when I get back." And with that, she left the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than I ever had before. As the day wore on, I tried to focus on the kids, on distracting myself from the overwhelming thoughts racing through my head. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, a sense of dread lingered. Why did she choose to spend her birthday with her coworkers? Was this just an excuse, or was there something more going on? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The day stretched on, each minute crawling by. By the time evening came, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to come home, pretending like nothing was wrong. I needed answers. I deserved answers. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, the little things that had been adding up over the past few weeks. The late nights, the distant attitude, the sudden changes in her behavior. I knew I had to confront her, but I wasn't sure what I would do if the truth was as ugly as I feared. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Her absence weighed heavily on me as I watched the clock tick, each minute stretching longer than the last. I tried to busy myself with the kids, but their innocent chatter only seemed to make my thoughts sharper, more focused. I couldn't stop replaying the events of the morning in my head. She had been distant for weeks. I had noticed the small things, how she no longer asked about my day, how her smiles felt more like reflexes than genuine expressions of love. She had become absorbed in her work, buried in late-night emails and phone calls that she'd brush off when I asked about them. Even when we were together, there was a wall between us. She had become an enigma, a stranger I couldn't quite figure out. It wasn't just the birthday thing that felt off. It was everything that I had always been able to rely on her. Our relationship had never been perfect, but it was ours, built on trust and affection. So, when she came home late that night, the pieces began to fall into place. There was something about her behavior that didn't add up. Her perfume was too strong, as if she had been trying to mask something, and she was wearing a slightly different dress than when she left. My mind immediately went to dark places. Was she meeting him? Was she lying about the dinner? When she walked in, I acted normal, at least on the surface. I greeted her with a casual smile, though inside, I was a storm. "Had a nice time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it was fine," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter without making eye contact. "We just had some drinks and ate. Nothing special." But it didn't feel right. The way she spoke, the way she avoided looking at me, all screamed of something more than a simple work dinner. I couldn't just sit around anymore. I had to know. I had to find out what was going on. I couldn't live with this gnawing feeling in my gut, this persistent whisper that told me something was horribly wrong. So, I started paying more attention. I paid attention to every small detail, every text message that came in, every late-night phone call, every time she stayed out later than expected. Her story about dinner with her coworkers didn't add up, and I began to question the authenticity of her words. The next time she got up from her phone to go to the bathroom, I found myself glancing at her screen that I hadn't planned on snooping. But the doubt inside me was growing too loud, too insistent. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, her social media. I wasn't expecting to find anything, but I had to see for myself. The first message that caught my eye was one from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't have to read much of it before my heart sank. "I can't wait to see you again tomorrow night," the message said, followed by a heart emoji. There was no question in my mind now. She was having an affair. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted above all else, was lying to me, hiding something from me. And I had been blind to it. The next few days were a blur of emotion. I tried to ignore it, to go on with my normal life, but I couldn't. Every time she looked at me, every time we spoke, I felt the weight of her deception between us. She no longer seemed like the person I thought I knew. Her laughter no longer felt real. The way she touched me was cold, almost mechanical. The affair didn't feel like an isolated incident. It felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. It was a slow burn, a wound that wouldn't heal. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I continued my investigation, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The deeper I went, the more I uncovered. There were dozens of secret messages, hidden calls, and countless lies. The man she was seeing, her coworker, no less, had been involved for months. They had been meeting in secret, exchanging intimate words and promises. They had shared laughs, shared moments that I wasn't a part of. I couldn't fathom the enormity of the betrayal. How long had this been going on? Was I that blind? That naive? The hardest part wasn't the fact that she was cheating. It wasn't even the lies. It was the realization that I no longer knew her. I no longer recognized the woman I had married, the woman who used to share her every thought with me, her every dream, her every fear. Now she had a separate life, one that didn't include me, one that I wasn't even invited to be a part of. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed proof. I needed to see the full picture before I made my move. I couldn't just walk in blind and confront her with nothing. So, I waited. I observed, I analyzed, and I prepared myself. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that I had two choices: confront her with everything I knew, or let her destroy me silently. Neither option was easy, but one thing was clear: I couldn't keep living a lie. The day of reckoning finally arrived. I had everything in front of me: texts, photos, even a few intimate messages between her and her coworker that were too detailed, too revealing to ignore. I had spent days stewing in my own rage, going back and forth between wanting to confront her and wanting to stay silent. But the silence was killing me. She had been acting even more distant than usual. She came home late, as usual, with a vague explanation about a work dinner. She smelled of perfume that wasn't hers, and I had no idea how to play it cool anymore. I called her into the living room, my heart hammering in my chest. She looked at me with a slightly confused expression, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "Sit down," I said, my voice unsteady. "We need to talk." She hesitated, sensing the shift in the air. "What's wrong?" she asked, though I could see she was already mentally preparing herself for what was coming. "I know everything," I said, my voice colder than I intended. Her face turned pale, but she didn't say anything. She didn't even try to deny it. She just sat there, her eyes avoiding mine. "You thought I was blind," I continued. "You thought I wouldn't find out. But I did. I know about the affair. I know everything." I watched her shoulders slump, her eyes welling up with tears. But I wasn't interested in her tears. I had heard enough lies for a lifetime. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling. I never meant for it to happen." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, the anger bubbling up to the surface. "You were sneaking around behind my back. You chose him over me, over our family." The room was thick with the weight of the truth. There was no running away from it now. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence hanging heavy between us as I stared at her. The weight of the truth pressed down on my chest, suffocating me. I had never imagined it would come to this, never imagined that I would have to confront the woman I loved with the cold, brutal facts of her betrayal. Her eyes darted around the room, unable to settle on me. She had that look of guilt, of shame, but it wasn't enough. No apology could undo what she had done. Her lips trembled as she tried to find the right words, but there were no words that would make this better. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said finally, her voice cracking. "It just happened. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I laughed, bitterly, shaking my head in disbelief. "A mistake? You've been lying to me for months. You've been seeing him behind my back, sneaking around. And you call that a mistake?" Her eyes welled with tears, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. The truth had broken me too deeply. I felt like I was drowning in this endless sea of lies, betrayal, and heartache. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched the hem of her dress. "I'm sorry, but I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. "What's been broken can't be repaired." She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away, not wanting any of her touch. I wasn't sure what I wanted, what I needed in that moment. Part of me wanted to rage at her, scream at her for everything she had done. But another part of me, the part one didn't want to acknowledge, was still holding on. Holding on to the woman I had loved for so long, even though I knew deep down that this was no longer the person I had married. "I never meant to hurt you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what came over me. I've been feeling so lost lately, and he was there for me. I thought I could control it, but I couldn't. I'm sorry." I shook my head, the frustration and anger building inside of me. "You think you can just apologize and everything will be okay? Do you think that after everything, I'm just going to forgive you and pretend like nothing happened?" She lowered her gaze, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said softly. "I don't even expect you to stay with me. But I am sorry. For everything." Her words felt hollow to me. Sorry. 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 I had heard that word a million times before. But words meant nothing in the face of betrayal. The trust we had built, the life we had shared, all of it felt like it was crumbling before my eyes. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of my decision. "I can't keep pretending like I don't know what you've done. I can't keep living this lie." She opened her mouth, as if to say something more, but I wasn't willing to listen. I wasn't willing to hear her excuses, her justifications. I didn't care about her reasons anymore. All I could feel was the betrayal, the pain of realizing that the woman I had trusted with everything had broken that trust in the worst way possible. "I'm leaving," I said, the finality of the words sinking in. "I need time. I need space to figure out what I want. But right now, I can't be here with you." Her face crumpled in pain, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had loved, the woman who had once been so full of life and love. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had shattered everything we had done. I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. I could hear her soft sobs behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything felt like it was falling apart. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. I saw the lies, the secrecy, the way she had hidden the truth from me for so long. It felt like I was suffocating in my own thoughts. That I stayed at a friend's house for a few days, needing distance from everything that reminded me of her. My mind raced constantly, torn between wanting to confront her and wanting to erase everything about her from my life. I had so many questions, but the answers would never come from her. I couldn't trust anything she said anymore. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the last few days. I thought about our life together, the years we had spent building something. I thought about the kids, about how they would feel when they found out what had happened. The guilt gnawed at me. But I also knew that I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. I couldn't live with someone who had betrayed me so deeply, but even as the anger consumed me, there was still a part of me that longed for her. I missed the woman I had married, the woman who had once been my world. But the reality was that she was gone. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. That I didn't contact her for a few days. I needed space. But she didn't stop trying to reach me. Her texts, her calls, they came incessantly. She wanted to talk, to explain, to beg for my forgiveness. But I couldn't bear to listen. Not yet. Not until I had sorted through the mess of emotions that were swirling inside me. One night, as I sat alone in my friend's living room, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. I almost didn't open it, but something inside me compelled me to read her words. "Please, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll do anything to make it right. Please, talk to me." The words felt like they were reaching across an abyss, but I wasn't sure if I could reach back. How could I? How could I ever trust her again? As the days passed, I became consumed by the thought of what to do next. Every part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her and never look back. But another part of me, one that I didn't want to acknowledge, wanted to forgive her. I didn't want to lose the woman I had once loved so deeply. I didn't want to lose the family we had built together, but deep down, I knew that forgiveness wasn't as simple as just letting go. Trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. And I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. That I needed answers. I needed to confront the reality of what had happened and make a decision about my future. It wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't keep living in limbo, stuck between the past and the present. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. And that terrified me more than anything. The days following the confrontation felt like an eternity, each moment stretching on endlessly. I could barely bring myself to go back home, to face the reality of what had happened. The house felt too quiet, too empty without the constant chatter of our everyday life. The kids were oblivious to the storm that had erupted in our lives, and I couldn't bring myself to tell them just yet. How could I explain something so devastating to them? They didn't deserve this. None of us did. That I spent my nights pacing, unable to sleep, wrestling with my thoughts. The anger within me was a constant companion, a fire that I couldn't seem to extinguish. I kept replaying the moment when I first found out, the message from her coworker. The images that had flooded my mind after that discovery. It all felt like a sick nightmare, one that I couldn't escape. But the worst part was the sense of betrayal. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved, had chosen him over me. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the deceit. It was everything she had hidden from me, everything that had been kept in the shadows. And now that I knew, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't go back to the way things were. How could I ever look at her again and not see the betrayal in her eyes? I moved back into the house after a few days, trying to pick up the pieces of my life. The kids didn't ask many questions, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They were confused, and I didn't blame them. I was confused, too. Every time I saw her, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. She was trying so hard to fix things, to explain herself, but I didn't know how to listen anymore. Words felt empty, meaningless. How could I trust her after everything? How could I ever believe that the love she had for me was real when she had been so willing to throw it all away? She begged me to talk, to give her a chance to explain. And part of me, desperately, wanted to hear her side of the story. I wanted to understand. But I knew that no explanation could undo the damage. No apology could take away the hurt. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had shattered me, but I knew that wouldn't help either. I wasn't angry just at her, I was angry at myself, too. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted her so completely, only to be left with nothing but the wreckage of our marriage? One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down with her in the living room. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she was clinging to whatever hope she had left. But I was no longer sure what I wanted. Part of me still wanted to believe in us, to find a way to heal, but another part of me knew that it was already too late. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you do this? She sat across from me, her face pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. I wish I could explain it, but I can't. I've made so many mistakes, and I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. You hurt me in ways I can't even describe. You lied to me, you betrayed me. And for what? For him. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not now. Not when everything had fallen apart. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice breaking. It just happened. And now I regret it more than anything. Regret? I repeated, feeling the bitterness rise in my chest. You regret getting caught, you mean? You regret that I found out. But you didn't regret it enough to stop. She didn't respond. She couldn't. There was nothing she could say to make this right. I knew it, and she knew it. The trust was gone, the bond we had built was shattered. The woman who had once been my everything, my partner, my best friend, was now a stranger to me. I stood up, pacing the room, unable to stay still. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can forget what you've done. She stood up, too, her hands reaching out to me, but I took a step back. Please, she said, her voice pleading. Please, don't leave me. I'm so sorry. I love you. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved with all my heart, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't know who she was anymore. I don't know if I love you anymore, I said quietly, and those words hurt more than anything I could have said. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. But one thing was clear, our marriage, the foundation of our life together, had crumbled beyond repair. I woke up the next morning with the weight of the world on my shoulders. The night had brought no clarity. My mind was still a whirlwind of emotions, doubts, and unanswered questions. I had spent so many nights asking myself the same thing: should I stay or should I go? Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? But as the days passed, I began to realize that the answers weren't so simple. There were no easy choices in a situation like this. I had been betrayed in the most painful way possible, and yet, there was still a part of me that longed for her. I missed the woman I had married. I missed the life we had built together. I missed everything that was now lost. The kids were oblivious to what had transpired, and I couldn't bring myself to tell them yet. They were too young to understand the complexities of love and betrayal. But I knew that eventually, I would have to explain it to them. The idea of breaking their hearts, of destroying the image they had of their mother, was unbearable, but I couldn't keep living a lie. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when I knew it wasn't. The reality was that our relationship had been fractured beyond repair. I had tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, to give her a chance to explain, but the truth was that the damage had already been done, and so, the decision became clearer: I had to let go. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the only way to move forward. I couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that had been built on lies. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. That I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that it was time for both of us to move on. And that was the hardest decision I would ever have to make. It's strange how quickly your world can change. One moment you're comfortable in the life you've built, believing everything is stable, and the next, everything you thought you knew is shattered into pieces. The choice I was facing wasn't just about staying or leaving, it was about who I had become in the process. That I spent the next few days in a haze. I would get up, go through the motions, pretend that everything was fine for the kids, but inside, I felt hollow. The image of my wife with him, the lies she'd told, the trust she'd broken, haunted me at every moment. It wasn't just her betrayal that stung, it was the fact that I had been blind to it for so long. Had I really not seen the signs? Or had I just ignored them because I didn't want to face the truth? I sat with my thoughts, weighing the situation over and over again. On one hand, I loved her. I had loved her for years, and there was a part of me that wanted to believe the woman I married was still there, that she wasn't entirely lost to me. But then, the other side of me screamed in agony. How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I trust her? She had shattered my heart with her actions, and trust, real trust, was something that was so hard to rebuild. Even if we stayed together, would I ever feel safe again? Would I be able to forgive her? I couldn't answer those questions yet. The truth was, I wasn't ready to make a decision about us, about our future. The weight of that decision was suffocating. No matter how much I tried to avoid it, there was an undeniable sense that everything had changed, and it could never go back to the way it was. The guilt of the situation loomed over me. I couldn't stop thinking about the kids. How would they react when they found out? They were too young to understand the complexities of relationships, of betrayal, and pain. They had no idea that their mother had done something so destructive, so unforgivable. The image of their innocent faces made it even harder to process. But it wasn't about them. At least not entirely. I had to make this decision for me. I had to stop living in the shadow of what was, and figure out what I could live with moving forward. That I still wasn't sure where to go from here, but I knew one thing: I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had already started to pull away emotionally, distancing myself from her without fully acknowledging it. I didn't want to hurt her more, but I couldn't stay and fake things. That wasn't fair to either of us. My heart wasn't in it anymore. I knew it would only get harder if I stayed in this space of uncertainty. It wasn't until a week later that the full impact of my decision hit me. My wife came to me one evening, her eyes red from crying, and she spoke the words that I had feared. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling. "I love you. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize how much I've hurt you. I never wanted to do this, but I made the worst mistake of my life." I felt a pang in my chest. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and for a moment, I was tempted to give her the chance she was begging for. My love for her, though severely damaged, was still there. But something inside me, something deep and instinctive, told me that forgiveness couldn't come so easily. Not when so much had been lost. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice strained, the pain raw in my words. "I don't know if I can forget everything you've done." Her face fell, but she didn't say anything else. We just stood there in the dim light of the living room, the silence between us louder than any words could be. "I don't know if I can stay," I continued, each word cutting deeper into both of us. "But I'm not sure I can leave, either. I'm still trying to figure out what's right, and what's wrong in all of this." Her face twisted with regret, but she knew I had a point. She had broken the foundation of our relationship. I wasn't just doubting her actions, I was doubting everything we had ever been. The love, the laughter, the trust, how could I ever get that back after everything that had happened? "I understand," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I'm sorry, more than you could know. I just want to fix this." But I couldn't promise her that. I couldn't promise that I'd forgive her, or that we could ever go back to what we had before. I had no answers, only questions. The uncertainty weighed on me. Was it worth it to try again? To work through the pain and rebuild what we had, or was it time to let go? The next few days passed in a haze of indecision. I spoke with a close friend about my situation, seeking some sort of clarity, but it only made things harder. I was torn between two halves of myself, one that wanted to hold on, to believe that love could conquer all, and one that knew I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace and happiness for someone who had already betrayed me. I tried to talk to her, but every conversation felt like we were speaking different languages. She would promise to do better, to be different, but I couldn't take her word for it anymore. Her actions had already spoken louder than anything she could say, and then, there was the looming reality that we had kids to think about. What kind of example would I be setting for them if I stayed? Would it be better for them to see us fight through this, or was it healthier to move on? What kind of life could I give them if I stayed in this broken marriage, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't? The decision wasn't just about me. It was about what kind of future I wanted for my children, what kind of life I wanted to build for all of us. The following days felt like a storm was brewing. Every conversation, every interaction with my wife, felt like it could go either way. There were moments when it seemed like we might work things out, when she'd show me tenderness, when I'd remember the good times we had. And then there were moments that pushed me further away, when I saw her attempt to justify her actions, and I felt the betrayal all over again. That I knew deep down that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I needed to make a decision. I needed closure. But could I really walk away from her? From everything we had? As the days wore on, I spent more time away from the house. I needed space, clarity. I needed to know what was best for me, for the kids, for our future. I went on long walks, did everything I could to clear my head, but the decision continued to evade me. How could I move forward from here? Should I let go of the past, or should I hold on to what we had? The days after that night were filled with a paralyzing silence. My thoughts swirled endlessly, trapped in an emotional cyclone that seemed impossible to escape. I kept seeing the same image over and over again, the one of her with him. I could no longer look at her without that picture flashing in my mind. Every time she walked into the room, my heart sank, and the betrayal weighed heavily on my chest. I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but it was like walking around with a constant ache. It was hard to breathe through the fog of resentment and hurt. The kids didn't understand. How could they? To them, their mother was still the loving, caring figure who had been there for them since birth. They didn't see the cracks, didn't hear the whispered arguments behind closed doors. I could never bring myself to tell them the truth, not yet. I needed time to process it all, to figure out what my next steps would be. But the guilt of keeping this from them was suffocating. They deserved to know the truth, but I didn't want to destroy their world. Not my wife had become a shadow of herself. The woman who once radiated confidence and joy was now broken, apologizing for things that could never be fixed. She kept asking for forgiveness, but no matter how many times she said, "I'm sorry," it didn't make me feel any better. Words had become empty. The damage was too deep. There was no magic phrase that would erase the pain, no confession that would make me feel as though everything would be okay again. One evening, as I sat in the living room, my mind swirling with memories of better days, my wife sat down beside me. Her hand brushed against mine, and for the briefest moment, I felt the warmth of our past. But it quickly faded. I couldn't pretend anymore. "I can't do this," I said softly, almost to myself. But she heard me, and the quiet sobs that followed broke my resolve. She begged, pleaded with me to reconsider, but deep down, I knew there was no coming back from this. The love I had once felt for her was now tarnished, stained with doubt and anger. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that she had destroyed everything we had built, but the words felt trapped in my throat. The last thing I wanted to do was hurt her more than I already had, but I was hurt. I was devastated. I was torn apart. And the fact that she had caused all of this, broke the bond we had shared, was something I could never forget. That I could see the shame in her eyes, the helplessness, and the desperate desire to make things right. But there was nothing she could do to fix this. Not now. Not after everything. We had both crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. One night, as I lay awake in bed, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. The emotional toll it was taking on me was unbearable. I was suffocating in a life that no longer made sense. And I realized something that, in that moment, broke me just a little more. I had to choose myself. I had to make a decision that would allow me to heal and move forward, no matter how painful it was. But how could I? How could I walk away from the person I had loved for so many years, the person I had once built a life with? How could I leave my children in a broken home? The fear of failure, of ruining everything, gripped my heart. Yet, staying felt like an even bigger betrayal. A betrayal of my own self-worth, my own dignity. The breaking point was inevitable. I had reached the point where I could no longer deny what needed to be done. The day I made my decision was the day that everything shifted. It wasn't a single moment that prompted it. It wasn't some grand revelation that came to me in an instant. It was a gradual realization, one that crept into my mind, took hold of my heart, and finally, in a moment of sheer clarity, freed me from the uncertainty that had clouded my every thought. That I spent days thinking, weighing the pros and cons of staying versus leaving, of trying to rebuild versus walking away from the wreckage. But nothing seemed to feel right. Every possible scenario felt like a compromise, like I was settling for something less than I deserved. One morning, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. The streets were quiet, and the cool air felt refreshing. I had always enjoyed moments of solitude, and today, it felt like the right time to embrace it. I needed to reconnect with myself, to remind myself who I was outside of the role of a husband, a father, a man who had been betrayed. I needed to find my identity again. As I walked, memories of the good times we'd shared flooded back. There were moments when I had felt truly loved, truly seen, by her. There were the birthdays, the anniversaries, the quiet evenings at home when we just enjoyed each other's company. Those memories seemed so distant now, like they belonged to another lifetime, but as I thought about those moments, I also realized something important. They didn't erase the pain. They didn't undo the betrayal. The person she had become, the choices she had made, could not be justified by a few good memories. And then it hit me, I had been holding on to the person I wanted her to be, not the person she had become. I had been clinging to an illusion of love, an illusion of trust, that no longer existed. And the truth, however painful, was that I needed to let her go. I needed to let go of the version of her that I had fallen in love with. Because that woman wasn't coming back. That I wasn't ready to confront her just yet, but I knew in my heart that the moment had come to take action. I could no longer stay in this limbo of indecision. I had to be strong for myself and for my kids. That evening, after I returned home, I looked at her, this woman I had once known so well, and I realized that I had already made my decision. I was no longer the man who had once blindly trusted her. I was now someone who had learned the hardest lesson of all: trust is not easily rebuilt. And for me, the trust had been destroyed beyond repair. When the time finally came to speak the words I had been avoiding, I felt the weight of the decision settle heavily in my chest. It was time to tell her. To confront the truth that had been looming over us for weeks. That I waited until the kids were at school. The house felt unusually quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably shifted. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, her eyes still red from the sleepless nights she'd spent crying, hoping, praying that I would forgive her. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This would be the hardest thing I had ever done. I've made my decision, I said quietly. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending. I need to move on. Her face went pale, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I didn't need her to say anything. I didn't need another apology. I had heard them all before, and they had lost their meaning. I'm not angry anymore, I said, the bitterness slowly giving way to a strange calmness. I'm just done. It's time for both of us to move forward. And with those words, I sealed the fate of our marriage. It wasn't about hate. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about choosing my own peace and allowing her the space to grow, even if it meant apart from me. She nodded slowly, the weight of the truth sinking in. We didn't need to say more. It was over. The chapter of our lives together had ended. As I walked away, the relief was almost immediate. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. It hurt, God, it hurt more than I could describe, but it was a pain that would eventually fade. I knew it would take time, but I also knew that I had made the right choice for me and for my children. The end of this chapter was the beginning of a new one. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future ahead of me, one that was my own.